The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Hello and welcome to Weighted Donuts. I'm Wayne Unger, and I'm here with my co-host and my favorite younger son, Wyatt Unger. And tonight's guest is Dave Jordan. I had Dave on quite a while back. Dave is the author of Cobra, biography about Dave Parker, the Cobra. Dave also wrote Fastball John, biography about John D'Acquisto, who I actually had on my show a long time ago. So, Dave, welcome, and Wyatt, how you doing? I haven't seen you in a while.
Hey guys, thanks for having me on again, Wayne. It's great to hear your voice. It's been too long.
It certainly has. It certainly has. So, I tell you what. Let's go right to the book, and tell us, give us a little. How did Dave Parker? And by the way, was there any confusion when you were with Dave Parker, like Dave and Dave? Did you run into that at all? Yeah,
Dave says that I have to be called DJ. There's only one Dave in his presence. So
okay,
it's like, oh, you're a DJ from now on. So
okay,
but it's all good-natured. We're all just Dave and Dave. It's all good.
So what was Dave? What did Dave want to? Besides, writing his story, I mean, being the one to write his story, knowing that nothing was hearsay or assumed, what was Dave looking to get out there in his book?
He wanted to chronicle the time of the peak of black baseball, because it really isn't a book that chronicles and it really explores the brotherhood of black players during the 1970s and 80s, quite like what Dave experienced. And he was a guy who, he mingled with teammates, he mingled with opponents. They hung out, before the game, after the game, on the field, off the field, and it really wasn't. That's never really been explored or depicted in books, and he wanted to do something that was different. He wanted to, quote unquote, spread some sunshine on some of these dynamic athletes who really didn't get their chance to shine. And, he really wanted to talk about things that haven't been spoken of. And for a while there, in the mid to late 2010s, there weren't a significant number of books about black baseball. And he felt, and I agreed with him, that we were kind of, at that moment, filling a bind, filling a hole in the publishing world.
And how does he feel like he's, historically unfairly viewed?
I think he believes that the world hasn't completely heard his story, in full. They haven't seen Dave Parker in full or heard from Dave Parker in full. And he's not a social media maven. He's not really on Facebook. He's not at all on Twitter or Instagram or anything like that. So he wanted this moment to really have people sit down, and he wanted to create a literary experience where the reader felt like he was having a beer with the Cobra. And I think we accomplished that.
Excellent. Wyatt, you got any questions?
Going back to how he feels about his image, so to speak, his WAR metrics are as good as any Hall of Fame right fielder. How does Dave feel about not making the Hall of Fame?
Here's the thing. If he goes to an event in Cooperstown, he'll walk into the room and there's Brett and there's Carew and there's Reggie and there's Bench and they look at him, there's Schmitty, and they look at him as one of them, and really one of them. They see most ball players that they played with and they see them as colleagues, but they see Dave Parker as a peer. He knows he wakes up every morning and he knows he is the Cobra. So it's like, either they're going to make it happen or they're not going to make it happen. It's not all that significant to him. It would be nice, It would be nice for anybody to enjoy that weekend of celebration and celebrating. But look, here's a guy that Barry Larkin was inducted to the Hall of Fame. And for his ceremony, Barry Larkin insisted, and he was teammates with Dave Parker from 1986 and for 86 and 87. And he basically insisted that Dave Parker attend Cooperstown, the ceremony at Cooperstown. He insisted that Parker and his wife travel with Larkin and his family to get to Cooperstown. He insisted that Parker stay with him in the house that he rented for that weekend. And he insisted that Parker sit up front when Larkin gave his speech and his acceptance speech. And he basically told the 30,000 some odd fans who were there to see Larkin, Dave Parker is responsible for much of the reason that I'm up here tonight. So Dave Parker in his heart knows that he is a significant member of baseball history.
So, the list of his teammates, obviously quite impressive. But one guy that rings out, I'm just curious if he shared any stories, particularly like the wow kind of stories about Doc Ellis. Anything?
Yeah. Oh my God! I mean, basically, Doc Ellis wrote a book, and basically that book, Doc Ellis in the Country of Baseball, came out in 1976, 77. I came out like 77, and it's basically about a lot of wild things that happened to Doc while he was with Pittsburgh and with the Yankees to a lesser degree. And a lot of the stories that are in there, Parker has to sort of share the other side of those stories. So you get a lot of that. Parker's agent was Tom Reich. Tom Reich's first client in Major League Baseball was Doc Ellis. So there's an enormous amount of overlap with respect to Doc Ellis in the Cobra book. And that's not just during the Pirates' time. It's during his time with Texas, and even during his time with that short period in '79 when he was with the New York Mets. So Doc Ellis appears quite a bit in Cobra.
Just give us one little tidbit. I mean, let's face it. Let's tease the audience a little bit to want to hear a little more. But give us something amusing regarding Doc Ellis.
Sure. We
all know about and of course if there's another side of the pitching while on LSD, we'd love to hear that or something else.
Well, I mean, that happened in 1970. Dave Parker at that moment was probably, I believe he was on the verge of being signed by Pittsburgh. I don't have the date in front of me, but he was not with Pittsburgh Pirates, the Major League Ball Club, on the roster or in the stadium at that time. But here's a quick story. 1973, Dave Parker arrives at San Diego Stadium to play the Padres. He's coming from Charleston from AAA. He's just been called up. Gene Klein's had his knee ripped up on sliding into second base. And Parker gets to the ballpark at like the seventh inning. And the game's over. Pirates demolish San Diego, and they're going back to the Sheraton in near the beach. And what happens is Doc Ellis is leaving his hotel room with Bob Moose, and Dave Parker wants to follow them along. And Doc's attitude is basically, man, I can't take you out the first night you're in the major leagues. Verdon, the manager, will have my ass for doing that. So, but he says, when we get to San Francisco, I'm going to get you some new threads. And what happens is once they get to San Fran, Parker's in his hotel room. He hears a knock at the door at 10 a.m., and he's like, and it's Doc, and he says, get up, we're going shopping. And so they go shopping, they buy all sorts of clothes, and Doc Ellis foots the bill for everything. And they're in this one store, and Parker sees these incredible platform shoes, nothing like he'd ever seen before, and he's just mystified by them. And Doc can tell, as he's paying for all the other clothes, he can tell that Parker really wants these shoes. And he basically looks at at the Cobra and kind of smiles and is like, "You want those, right?" And Parker didn't really say no. He didn't say yes. He didn't want to be piggy, but he's like, eh. And then Doc whips out his wallet and he's like, "Screw it, put that on my master charge." And he just paid for everything. He took care of Parker, and not just in the off the field sense that when Parker was having troubles early on, he sat down with Parker and he wrote up a book on all of the pitchers in the National League, and that became Parker's log for how he dealt with the pitchers. But basically, Doc went down team by team, pitcher by pitcher, and explained what they were doing. So in many ways, class with Mr. Ellis, wasn't all about, fooling around. It wasn't about recess. There was a lot of coursework as well.
That's great to hear. Does Dave follow the game today?
He does follow the game. He's a sports fanatic. He's an absolute sports fanatic. If it's a Saturday in February, he's watching NCAA basketball. If it's Sunday in the fall, he is watching the Bengals and possibly the Browns. If it's a Saturday afternoon in March after March Madness, he's watching exhibition baseball. He loves sports, and he does follow the game. He has some concerns, and at some point, he's going to address what his concerns are with the game right now. But it's a different kind of game. He says it in some ways better, some ways worse, but he does have his thoughts about the game. He definitely has intricate ideas and thoughts about it.
No, the reason I ask is because I have found a lot of major leaguers that I've had on my show, they don't follow the game that much. You try to, generally, like I would always ask, so who do you really like in the game today? And it was, always very generic answers. Of course, they'll always say Mike Trout and this and that. I go, okay. I go, is there any and then if I ever followed it up with is any lesser known names? I don't really watch it all that much. So I stopped asking the question. But I was just curious about that. Why
Dave Parker loves McCutchen, even at this advanced age, and he loves Mookie Betts. There's a couple others, but those are the guys that he really has a lot of nice things to say.
Well, that's good, and I personally am, happy to see actually McCutchen is actually making a heck of a contribution this year. Nothing, unfortunately a shadow of his, early years, but he's actually having a pretty darn good year. He started really slow, and he's actually doing quite well. I'm sorry, Wyatt. I always talk too much, and I always have to stop and let Wyatt jump in. Wyatt, you got anything else you'd like to add or ask?
I really enjoyed the Doc Ellis story because I feel like that's a guy who you only hear the negatives of as far as story-wise for his career. But a question I wanted to ask was, I looked at what you sent over, and Dave's original dream was to be a running back at The Ohio State University. Was there any event that sort of swayed him to baseball instead?
Oh, sure. He going into his senior year, which was the fall of 1969, Dave Parker was considered the best tailback prospect among recruiters in the Cincinnati area. He was number one, and he was going somewhere. He was going to Ohio State or Eastern Michigan or Michigan State or possibly Penn State. He was going somewhere. And the first game of the season in 1969-70 high school year, he, third play, ran a 40-yard touchdown. On the fourth play, he blew out his knee. And he tried to fight his way through it, and we wrote about that in the book. And at one point, and Parker was talking about it, and basically he was like, the coach asked me if I was all right. You know what I told him. And it was really, that's the kind of guy. He would play through pain, even at that early age. And ultimately, he had to undergo double knee surgery in November of his senior year and February of his senior year because he tried to play basketball on his bad knee, and it cost him his spring season in baseball. But he had enormous talent and enormous native ability that he was ultimately drafted anyway. But the doctors basically did tell him that his football career was done.
Interesting. And he wasn't an early round pick. I mean, granted, the draft went like 40, 50 rounds back then, but he was drafted like
14th round.
14th round. Bingo.
Yeah, he went in the 14th round. And there was a story behind it too. Basically, I had tracked down a scout for the Baltimore Orioles who had tried out, auditioned Parker in his senior year, and he wrote up a whole. The Hall of Fame has a copy of it, as a matter of fact. And this guy was a rookie scout for the Orioles, and he basically, his line sounds like the log line for a movie. It was basically high ceiling, high risk, worth the gamble. That's what he said about Dave Parker. And to this day, when he speaks with old colleagues from the Orioles, all they do is lament the fact that they didn't draft Parker. He basically told them, you got to draft this guy. If you can get him late, get him late. You have to draft Dave Parker. If the Pirates don't pick him in 14, maybe the Orioles do in 15 or 16 or 17. The Reds, his hometown team, that had actually had him try out as a sophomore in high school and were going to sign him as a sophomore, decided not to sign him as a senior, and not to draft him as a senior, I should say. And what happened was Dave Parker he didn't play baseball his senior year of high school. And his buddy, who was a starting center fielder, was being recruited and looked at by scouted by the Indians and the Pittsburgh Pirates. And he found out about a tryout in Columbus, which is about 2 hours away from Parker's high school. And he was told that he couldn't go to this tryout. And his teammate, who was on the team, was allowed to go. But Parker, because he wasn't on the team, wasn't allowed to go. So basically his teacher said, sit down. I don't care if you finish your test. You're staying in this class. And Parker had a decision to make. Is he going to stay in class and miss the tryout, or is he going to go to the tryout and get suspended? I think you probably know what he did. And so he goes to the tryout, and ultimately the Reds scouts went around, because of that moment, how there was no internet in 1969 or 1970, so the story went from Parker cursing out his teacher to Parker punching his teacher in the face. And that's why the Reds were telling everybody that Parker was militant. And really what happened after that, a lot of other scouts were like, this guy Parker seems really talented. And then when the Reds, the fact that they were calling him militant wasn't working or being persuasive with other scouts, they started to say, he can't hit a major league fastball, which was absurd. So, unfortunately, the Reds were... Nowadays, Parker and the Reds get along wonderfully, and Reds management loves Dave Parker, and he's there very often. But back in 1970, they did what they could to try to persuade other scouts not to sign him.
Interesting. The Pirates were actually known back then. They went for the talented, high ceiling guys, and it paid off for them. It paid off for them.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Interesting. Does he, besides what's mentioned in the notes here, besides Roberto Clemente and Willie Stargell, are there any other players let's say outside players that he didn't play with that he got to know? Did he mention any that he truly admires?
Admires, I will say this, he was very close to J.R. Richard. He was extremely close to J.R. Richard. We chronicled that in the book, and there's really a compelling narrative of their friendship and kind of how things ended up for J.R. And we talk a lot about that. We talk a lot about a pitcher that you may vaguely remember named Larry Demery. He was he was a pitcher for the Pirates. And in 1974, Dave Parker was their number one position player prospect. Larry Demery was their number one pitching prospect. And the two of them were the prizes of the organization. And so we chronicle that very closely. They roomed together at some point on the road just before players started getting their own rooms. They were the very best of friends for a number of years. And that's a big part of the books, the angle of brotherhood and friendship. The book is all about Parker and his friends. And we do explore that in really exquisite detail. And Parker talks a lot about, how great Larry Demery was and what happened to Larry Demery, and the friendship between the two of them is quite extensive in the book. And Demery was sort of was the baby brother of Doc Ellis. He'd grown up in California. He had that Doc Ellis type swagger, for better or for worse. And, we talk a lot about that as well. And we talk about the affection that Doc Ellis and Larry Demery had for one another as well, in addition to that.
Wow. I'm just curious, are either you or Dave, is everything being sold through the publisher?
Nebraska? No,
yes.
Actually you can buy it on Amazon, and it's like under $15 on Amazon right now. It's for a 450-page book. That's pretty good. Hardcover, that's pretty good. It's on Amazon. Barnes & Noble. I was just at my local Barnes & Noble. They have 2 copies there. So you can get it at most bookstores. Where you buy books, you can buy Cobra. And, of course, Amazon. Yeah, blah, blah, blah.
Just curious, a lot of former players that I've had on that have written books are also, a lot of them have self-published as well, but
yes.
Besides going through the normal channels, they are also, will sell the books themselves through their,
Mm-hmm.
personally and autograph it. So for someone who might be a big,
absolutely. Yeah, Dave Parker has the Dave Parker 39 Foundation, where you can buy an autographed copy of Cobra. Absolutely.
Okay. I hope everybody heard that. Dave Parker 39 Foundation. So you can get yourself an autographed copy of the book, and and proceeds will go to the foundation as well, I believe. So
that's correct.
Excellent.
Yep. Yeah,
Excellent.
that's the DaveParker39Foundation.com. Yep.
Very good. Very good. So so Tom Reich passed away not too long ago, and he was Dave's agent. Did you through working on the book, did you get to know Tom very well?
I mean, we got quite close, and we started talking when I began my fact checking of Parker's stories, and our relationship grew very quickly. Tom was getting along in years, and Tom he was one of the first player agents in sports. I mean, he basically represented Doc Ellis, and then Manny Sanguian, and then Joe Morgan, then Chuck Foreman from the Vikings in football.
Of course.
And ultimately he was Mario Lemieux's agent in hockey. Tom loved hockey, but for the most part, Tom wanted me to chronicle his book also, and we had started talking about that. But he was just an incredible figure in the history of behind the scenes baseball business history, I guess you'd call it. And he was one of the first player agents, and we spent a lot of time together. At one point, I'll tell you a funny story. So Dave Parker and I got a publishing deal for Cobra, and we wrote an article for the Hardball Times, basically listing some of Dave's favorite songs. About 3 days later, I get a phone call from Major League Baseball, and they're telling me that they're throwing around the idea for a Cobra documentary, and can I help? Which means, can I get that access to Parker? Now, obviously, you're Major League Baseball. You're 3 phone calls from anybody who's ever played the game. So they just figured it would be an easier way for me to do that. So I said, so what do I say? Of course, how can I help? and they told me what they were looking to do. And I outlined a couple of storylines that they may not have been thinking of, and I think these are very effective. You may want to talk about this. But on the side of it, I felt a little bittersweet because I was wondering, God, am I going to write a 250-page book report of the documentary? And I was feeling a little down about it. And I called up Tom, and we were talking. At this point, we were talking like once a week. And I was trying to make sure that he had enough tape on himself to do his own book at some point. And I told him, and he just laughed and said, stop your stinking whining, buy a plane ticket, and come down to Sarasota and be with me for a week, and your problems will be solved. So I got on a plane, and I spent like 4 or 5 days with Tom at his place in Sarasota, and all we did was talk about baseball and the history, and he showed me files, and he showed me information and contracts and things of that nature. So I had the entire background of the story of Cobra as I was about to embark on the book with Dave. So I was ready to put this together. And it was some really interesting Tom Reich stories.
Now, did he talk about, did you have the opportunity to talk about other players that he represented?
Well, here's a funny story. Somewhere down the line, he became extremely close to George Steinbrenner, extremely close. And if you read Bill Madden's archives from Daily News in the 80s, he makes these remarks about how all of these Tom Reich clients ended up with the Yankees, whether it's Al Holland, Jack Clark, a host of them. But here's a funny story, and this is from the 90s. This is like a little past the Tom's heyday, but he finds out a nugget about one of the Yankees, and who's a free agent at the time. And it's basically David Cone. And David Cone was a free agent, I think it was 94, 95, and it was 95. And basically, he's trying to track down Steinbrenner. He finally catches Steinbrenner on a mobile phone at a charity benefit. Steinbrenner grabs the phone and just barks at Tom Reich. He says, this better be important. And Tom's like, well, your ace pitcher's about to sign a deal with the Baltimore Orioles down in Maryland. Do you think that's effing important? That was Tom Reich. Wow. And he basically had George Steinbrenner avert a disaster of David Cone signing with the Orioles.
Wow. It's funny. You talk about like Steinbrenner in the 80s, like, I debate with people quite often, particularly when they're addressing today's Yankees and how Steinbrenner, and he does, if George was here, and basically the 80s, for a knowledgeable Yankee fan, the 80s were an absolute disaster. I mean, they really were. I mean, I cringed at, and I always say, you know what? Yes, George is willing to spend the money, but the times when the Yankees won, when George was in charge, was when somebody else was running the team. So early on, he was new to the game, and Gabe Paul was the architect of the late 70s Yankees. And then Howard Spira, he hired Howard Spira to get dirt on Dave Winfield and got suspended. And then Gene Michael built that team. And once Steinbrenner came back, after that team was so successful, he knew he couldn't step in and muck it up. He knew at this point, like I'm stuck here. And people like, oh, he must be rolling in his grave. I'm like, man, like, there was a long list besides Tom Reich's clients. There was a long list of players that the Yankees acquired who past their prime. They weren't totally done, but they were certainly past their prime. So, yeah.
And a lot of them were Tom Reich clients, too.
Yeah, they were. But, oh, God, it was Yeah, I remember those days. Days. So, and tell me, so you yourself, how are you feeling about the game of baseball today?
I think there's a lot of people who are trying to sort of get into the game, a lot of observers, writers, and whatnot, that they're seeing that there's a path to getting employment with the game by thinking of it in a certain way. And there's a lot of these type of observers that I think would rather see a team lose the right way than win seemingly the wrong way. And I think that's a problem with the game. I think that there's a lot of players that are being taught now to don't make outs, or obviously you never want to make outs, but their mindset is don't make an out. It's a defensive posture versus trying to get the run home, which is an aggressive, positive posture. And I think that is an issue. That's my own personal belief.
Oh, I agree 100%. I mean, and I've been, and it's not only with the, of course I'm a Yankee fan. But they are the perfect example. Okay, is the problem with the Yankees as well as a lot of other teams is offensive philosophy. The three absolutes are killers, and I've been saying for years. Like, every year, Yankees, they're looking great. Yeah, they can win it this year. And I've been saying for years, I've seen teams for years slug their way to the postseason. Very few of those teams slug their way to a World Series trophy. Because once you get to the postseason, the games generally get tighter. And if you're a one-dimensional team and your dimension is not working for you, you're a dead duck. I actually made a comment tonight. The Yankees traded for Joey Gallo, and I was like, am I the only one who thinks that Adam Frazier would have been a better fit for the Yankees than Joey Gallo? In other words, like, the Yankees, they're hitting home runs, but they're hitting solo home runs. Why? Because there's other guys in the lineup not getting on base. LeMahieu's not having a good year. Of course, Gardner's been declining. Aaron Hicks has been hurt. He at least used to walk a bit. Clint Frazier, another guy, fell back down to earth and has been hurt. It's been killing them. So they're hitting home runs, but they're hitting solo home runs when they do, and after that, there's nothing.
Yeah, the other question. Yeah, the other thing you got to ask yourself is, how is Adam Dunn going to help this Yankees team? And this is basically the 2021 incarnation of Adam Dunn. So who knows? I don't see it really adding. It'll add some value, but I don't know if it's going to add considerable value.
Well, I mean, think about it. It's like if, let's just say, Joey Gallo, Aaron Judge, and Giancarlo Stanton are healthy for a whole season, and all right. Would you think like together the over/under on them alone would be about 625 for strikeouts for the season?
Yeah.
I mean, and the Yankees will definitely lead the league in strikeouts, because these guys will push them right over the top. So you got to balance it out, and that's why the Yankee teams just are always close but no cigar. So, Dave, I know you're running out of time, so it's Cobra. You can get it on Amazon, and the other one was Nebraska Press, Barnes & Noble, or you can go directly to Dave Parker's 39 Foundation, and you can order the book there and get it autographed, and a little bit of that will go to charity, and that's always a beautiful thing.
Yep.
So, I'm just curious. I know right now you're still engaged with the book, and
Yep.
but a little further down the road, as far as the long game goes, is there another project in sight down the road?
I'm kind of I'm throwing around the idea about doing something about youth sports and the history of youth sports through the lens of another ball player. So I'm not too sure if I'm going to move forward with that, but that's an idea that I've been throwing around.
Okay, excellent. So, listen, you have a great night, and I really appreciate you coming on. And when things quiet down a little bit, please, anytime, I just happened to catch you, like when you said you had some free time, but anytime, you want to get on, you got something to say, you want to knock something out, just let me know, man. You're always welcome on.
Wayne, Wyatt, I appreciate having me on, and it's always a pleasure to hang out for a little bit.
All right, man. You have a good night.
Take care. Thanks again.
Bye-bye. Okay, folks, I hope you enjoyed the show. Wyatt, thank you for being here with me, and we'll see you all next week.
The proceeding has been a Comfortably Zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.